Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Place Northwest event. Today it's the Liverpool Development Update. I know what you're thinking, that's not Sarah or Paul. I'm Dan Whelan, reporter at Place Northwest, and this is my first time hosting one of our Remo events. Before we dive headfirst into the discussion, I'm going to quickly run through a couple of bits of housekeeping. This will be Place Northwest's last virtual briefing before we kick off in-person events once more, which is very exciting. It's been a long old while, and we can't wait to have you in the room with us for our Cheshire Development Update on the 24th of June. For full details of that and to register, you can visit our website. For today, though, we are using Remo, a platform that has served us very well during the last 14 months, when meeting in person hasn't been possible. What we and other people love about Remo is that it allows you to network from the comfort of your office, home or otherwise. To make the networking process as smooth as possible, please create a profile for yourself if you haven't done so already, as that allows people to know who you are and what you do, like a virtual name badge. Once you've done that, click on the table and you're ready to network. There'll be a networking break between today's two panels at 11 o'clock and an additional opportunity to make contacts after the second discussion. Don't worry, you don't need to do anything. Once the panel ends, you'll be catapulted as if by magic into the main hall where you can network until you're hoarse. And finally, I would like to thank today's sponsors, Pegasus and ITS. Now, on to Liverpool. Between reviews and reports, arrests and unrest, stadiums and scandal, it has been quite the year for the city, and that's without mentioning the pandemic. Following Max Keller's damning report into the running of the City Council, Liverpool is embarking on a new era that it hopes will see the city capitalise on its untapped potential and be transformed into a place that is open to investment, ready to do business, and determined to draw a line under past failings. There's a lot to be excited about. Everton's new stadium at Bramley-Moore Dock is predicted to provide a £1.3 billion boost to Liverpool's economy, and Peel LNP's £5 billion Liverpool Waters project, where the stadium sits, is gathering steam. Elsewhere, areas like the Baltic Triangle and Paddington Village are continuing to take shape, forging their own identities as hotbeds for industries big and small. And the redevelopment of the former Littlewoods building could see Liverpool become a leading location for film and media excellence. And then there's the small matter of Liverpool's famous leisure, tourism and hospitality sectors, straining at the leash and ready to bounce back as best they can after a meagre year to do their bit to contribute to the city's economic recovery. But there are still issues to address. The City Council, led by Chief Executive Tony Reeves and newly elected Mayor Joanne Anderson, is beginning the process of rebuilding the trust of Liverpool's residents, while the city also continues to grapple with a sluggish office market, poor levels of housing delivery, and the limitations placed upon the development community by the divisive UNESCO World Heritage Site designation. With all that to discuss and much more besides, let's waste no more time in inviting our first panel to the stage. Joining me in this first session, where we will discuss Liverpool's tumultuous year and the path to recovery, are Nicola Rigby, Principal at Avison Young, Alan Bevan, Managing Director of City Residential, Ian Finlayson, Estate Director at Liverpool One, and Bill Addy, Chief Executive of the Liverpool Bid Company. Could you all please activate your cameras and microphones? Excellent. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
Hope you're all well. Before we get into it, I would like to remind our audience to remember to submit any questions that they have for panelists using Remo's Q&A function. Should be to the right-hand side of your screen. This is your chance to probe and pry, quiz and query, so don't be shy. I'll do my best to get to as many as possible throughout the next hour. Bill, we'll start with you. Would you please be able to give us an overview of how the pandemic and the events at the City Council have impacted Liverpool over the last year or so?
Well, that's not a very big question for the opening part of the session, but thanks, Dan. Well, pandemic, we know the impact on the city. Pre-March 2020, our economy, in the visitor economy, so we look at retail, hospitality, leisure, was generating about £3.3 billion a year. That's just for the city. We know what happened, that our footfall fell off a cliff back in March. It dropped from where we were at about 1.1 million a week down to about, I remember at one point we were trying to pick people in the street, see if we can spot a person in the street. It was that bad. We lost about 80% of our footfall. And we know that we slowly built back up, didn't we? We had that reopening of non-essential retail back in June of last year when we saw slowly starting to come back. When hospitality reopened, footfall picked back up again. But then we've had the much publicised, we had our second lockdown. We did very well with the mass testing, and we were able to get back out of that second lockdown at a lower level than as we entered, but we know what happened then in December. So we are looking now towards a recovery, and that's the important thing, isn't it? That we're moving through, our infection rates are low, our vaccination uptake is reasonably high, could do better, but because infection rates are low, we know that we will be able to reopen again in June, because there is so much tension in the system at this moment in time, so many different impacts across businesses. I mean, we could spend the whole day talking about those impacts, but just the good news is that footfall at the beginning of last week had returned back to pre-pandemic levels. So there is a pent-up demand in the city, but we need to start to clearly, we need to now work towards recovery, and we can talk about that later.
Thank you. Ian, we'll bring you in there, because obviously one of the sectors that's been hardest hit by the pandemic was retail, but it seems from the outside looking in that Liverpool one has fared better than other shopping centres across the region. What do you put that down to?
Good morning, everybody. Well, just to echo a lot of what Bill said there, I mean, obviously it's been a hugely challenging last 12 to 14 months, a lot of stopping and starting, which makes things very, very difficult. To echo Bill's sentiment as well on recovery, things here have started, I have to say, pretty well and comfortably ahead of UK averages. Our footfall has come back slightly behind the rate of 2019. Obviously, we're comparing back to 2019 as everybody is at the moment, but the spend level is extraordinary. The pent-up demand that we have seen released over the course of the last few weeks is really significant. If I was to say that the average transaction value in our stores normally for this time of year is about £19, it's currently running at £32, which is an extraordinary increase. And why? Well, I think the unique environment that we have here of being a premium retail and leisure destination that doesn't have doors and a roof has been a big bonus for us. I've spoken to a lot of people in the industry that work in traditional covered malls. It's been a massive struggle for them. And what we've got here with big outdoor spaces, a park, is just, it fits in with what the government have advised in terms of hands, face space and fresh air. So people that want to be out and about, they can get that here. But one of the things that we looked at when we were looking at how we can get back to some sort of normality was outside dining. We normally have around about 650 external dining covers available. We've upped that to 1,300 since reopening. And hail, rain or shine, people have been happy to sit outside, sipping cocktails and eating meals with an umbrella up. It's things that people have missed, and we can offer those things because of the unique environment we've got. So we are very, very happy as things stand with how things have been.
Yeah, certainly. I think people's threshold for what's acceptable to sit outside and have a beer in has changed since lockdown lifted. You mentioned the number of covers being increased there, and obviously we've had the reopening of hospitality. That average spend that you mentioned, is that being skewed slightly by a huge increase in people wanting to eat out, or is retail driving it?
Well, it's actually both. There has been an increase in hospitality. I mean, if you try to get into a restaurant and just walk in over the course of the last few weeks, anywhere in the city, it's been very, very difficult. So it's all very much led by pre-bookings. So there is a huge demand there for leisure. However, what was really noticeable just before the last lockdown lifted, we had a couple of weeks of absolutely glorious weather. And I was up on the park one Sunday, just taking a look round, and what jumped out was everybody was wearing dark clothing in the sunshine. And we stood back and we went, there's going to be an explosion of spend on clothing here because people haven't got spring and summer wardrobes. And we've seen that. The demand out there for summer clothing, for bright clothing, has been extraordinary. and particularly at the premium end of the market, we've seen some huge spend. So it's driven by both elements. Where Liverpool One has had a competitive advantage over rival destinations in recent times is because we've been able to offer both retail and leisure because of that outside dining. Whereas if you did go to a Trafford Centre, for example, who I've spoken to, they actually only had 2 restaurants able to open with very small outside spaces, and even sipping coffee on the way round wasn't allowed. You were asked to leave the centre to do so. So we have really benefited by the unique environment that we have here. It's been a really good first month back.
Excellent, good to hear. Alan, we'll come to you. We'll move on to Resi, and a sort of similar question that I've asked to Bill and Ian. If you could give us an overview of how the last 12 to 14 months has impacted the residential market, that would be great.
Sure, yes. Down into sales and letting. Sales, as I think everybody, good morning, by the way, everybody. Sales has been stonkingly great for the last sort of 12 months across the whole of the UK. Suburbia has exploded. I mean, I think we've all got stories that, next door or the house down the road has gone up in 15, 20%. We even saw Wallasey and Birkenhead, two of the hotspots in the whole of the UK. So it's not just the better parts of the region. So in a sense, the sales market in the city centre has followed that trend to some degree. It's been our busiest time, but unfortunately in the city centre we've been impacted by the cladding scandal, is probably the best way to describe it. I think we all realise post Grenfell that sort of blocks of apartments have suffered. There's a form called the EWS1 form that is we must mention it 50 times in a day. So unfortunately that has sort of restricted the number of buildings and apartments we can sell. So I would say at the moment probably 40 to 50% of the built market in the city centre is unsaleable at this moment in time. Okay. We probably have hit the nadir and the bottom of the market, and we're starting to see the recovery where people have managed to get hold of the EWS1 form. So the demand is outstandingly good, but the supply is tight because of the EWS1 cladding issue. Interestingly enough, the main issue for us in the market is enough properties for owner occupiers to buy. Plenty of stock out there for investors, but if you want to live in a nice building in a good apartment, there is very little available in the market. Okay. So sales it's in a good place, and that will only get better. The interesting thing I think we see is that with Suburbia having gone through the roof, the city centre looks marvelously cheap. Some of the cynics question whether people would want to come back to the city. Liverpool hasn't got the employment strength to justify people living in the city. That is codswallop. The demand out there is huge because it's cheaper to live in the city centre than it is to live in a half decent suburb property. So on the letting side, it's been tough. We've had probably our toughest 12, 14 months. Our sort of vacancy rate now, so we manage just under 600 properties in the city. Our vacancy rate is about 8 to 9%. It's coming down quite quickly. Normally at this time of year, we'd be about 3 to 4%. So it's probably double where it should be. A bit of that down to an increase in supply at the wrong time. The most encouraging thing on the rental side, rents have held up reasonably well, again, especially for the good stock. But rent arrears have been a lot lower than we thought they were going to be. As we entered lockdown in March, April last year, we were hugely concerned. We anticipated up to 10% rent arrears, and we've come out the other side with about 2%. So, I think a lot of that comes down to the furlough scheme, especially in the retail, bar, leisure sector, which Liverpool is hugely reliant on. That has helped, a lot of those tenants who otherwise would have gone into arrears, being able to pay the rent. So overall, that's 12, 14 months. We can't complain. It's been reasonably good, and we look forward to the future with confidence. We think still great city, great place to live, and without any bias, we sit here with quite a hopeful hat on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to hear that the demand is there and coming back. One question I did want to ask you on the Resi side was, the number of stalled schemes in Liverpool, there seems to be a disproportionate amount compared to other places. And I read in your latest, in City Residential's latest quarterly report, that there was around 2,000 units, residential units currently stalled. Why are there so many stalled schemes in Liverpool, and what can the city do to ward against that?
Well, I'll start with the last question. I don't think the city can actually do much about it. You know, I think it's driven by market forces, and I think trying to control. I know that's the city's will. We'd all love to be able to control who develops a site, who buys a site, but it is very difficult to do, and sometimes the market will decide. And I think that might be the case here. Liverpool does things. You know, if it's doing well in Manchester, all the Scousers and the Liverpudlians, that we go for it, and we go for it in such a big way, and that's what we've done with development. You know, I think everybody who's got half an interest in being a developer has rocked up in the city, bought a site with bridging finance, and decided they're going to develop a site, and I think it comes down to the developers who know what they're doing, who have experience, what we would term as the proper developers. There's very few of them that have you know, hit the raft and struggle to develop out their sites. It's mainly been down to people who aren't developers. I mean, there's many a site been bought in the city from somebody who's never even refurbished a terraced house in their life, never mind developed a block of 200 apartments. So, you know, somebody asked me the other day whether I felt there was developers that have bought sites with no intention to develop them out, so basically looking to defraud potential buyers. And I said, no, I don't think there's too many of them. There are a few, but I think the majority of the ones that have stalled because they've got their numbers wrong, or they haven't marketed in a great way. The biggest cause of stall developments, I think, in the city, and we've seen it. We've seen feasibilities with the bill costing at £130 a foot. Anybody talking on this discussion or knows that it's going to cost them £170 a foot or £160. So straight away that they pay over the odds for a site that on their Excel spreadsheet stacks up, because the bill cost is at 130 and the resales are at 310. And when they realise that neither of those are achievable, bang, it hits the buffers and the site runs into trouble. A lot of the sites have been bought on short-term finance as well. Right. We know that on short-term finance, you know, the financiers ultimately want their money back. And so it's a combination, but that's the main. And I think generally we have bought and tried to redevelop too many secondary sites in locations that the city isn't quite ready to see developed. Maybe once for the next boom. Yeah, so lack of a kind of a joined up plan is impacting these schemes. Bit of naivety as well, by the sounds of it. Yeah. Nicola, can I bring you in on this point? So, in terms of Liverpool's regeneration prospects going forward, what are you seeing and what are you hearing from the market?
Yeah, I mean, Liverpool has always been one of those, you know, for me, for our business, we've got an office in the city centre, and I'm based across the northwest. I cover the whole of that patch. I would say over the last 5 years, at least 50% of my time has been spent within the Liverpool City region, because the Liverpool City region gets regeneration. It obviously has a need for regeneration, but it gets it as well. It's a very engaged and sector with good connections into central government and funding in that respect. So in terms of what that means though for Liverpool going forwards, and where we think, you know, I guess joining all those dots together actually in terms of that whole conversation that's just taken place, I think the regeneration story going forwards is about those neighbourhoods around the city centre. So we're particularly interested in what we call the waterfront zone, which effectively is everything between the water and Liverpool One and up to the north. All those communities where actually a lot of those stalled sites sit, almost as a wrapper around the core of the city centre. We've also been doing a lot of work in some of the northern district centres, supporting the regeneration programmes there. And I think it's a combination of you know, some of the really important themes for Liverpool going forwards and a need for regeneration. So those communities, lots these are really well established. There's quite significant long-term deprivation. In old money, they would have been housing market renewal locations, really significant portions of private rented stock, poor quality housing product in general lack of investment, small scale retail centres that are struggling, and still development sites. But within that, really strong communities that really want to be engaged in the regeneration process, but perhaps have felt a little separate from what's been happening in the city centre from an actual feeling the value of it perspective. So I think for us, in terms of the next wave of conversations with the city and a focus, it will be those neighbourhoods, that donut around the core of the centre that once again need our genuine attention. I think the concern we have, and it's not a city council concern, it's a government concern, is that capital programmes funding for regeneration at the moment almost feels like they're decided on a whim. They're kind of hobby projects rather than long-term sustainable investment in regeneration. So when my career started, we dealt with single regeneration budget programmes that were year on year on year. Housing market renewal was a 5-10 year investment programme in housing stock. What we have now is single round applications for one-off capital projects. So I think there's a challenge in the system in terms of how we deliver regeneration, but they, for me, have to be our focus going forward. Just the last one from me on that, in terms of linking that into development in the city centre as well, is getting social value right in Liverpool. I really believe that any new development and investment in the centre, the benefit of that has to be felt within those communities. And I think there's a real opportunity for Liverpool, after the report, with the changes that are coming within the city, with this new era for Liverpool, actually focusing on social value and connecting communities and people to the value of development, I think could be a real for Liverpool to focus on, and a real winner from a market perspective as well.
Absolutely. And one of the neighbourhoods, on the outskirts that you were talking about there is L4, where you're currently doing some work. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, L4, people might not really know what it is. We've just gone through a bit of a rebrand exercise, but L4 effectively is a postcode, and it's the work that we've been doing is around County District Centre. Clearly, the fantastic news about Everton relocating to Bramley-Moore Dock, superb level of investment, but clearly leaves the existing Goodison site needing development and investment, and that Goodison Park sits on the doorstep of one of the most deprived communities in this country, actually, let alone within Liverpool. So the work that we've been doing with the city is specifically focused on County District Centre, which is classed as a failing district centre. It's an old school linear parade, effectively, set amongst really dense stock with quite acute housing market and social issues. That we've been doing is in partnership with Everton in the community and the City Council, trying to best invest in the region of £5 million to improve that location for that local community. And actually the core of the work, just linking back to that point about social value, has been developing a brand, an identity, and critically an engagement programme, because clearly I think for the success of that project, both Goodison Park and county and L4 as a combination as a result is increasing that local sort of allegiance and spend and positive attitude and feel within that location. So there's been a really significant focus on community engagement as part of that exercise, which Everton and the community have been great advocates and leaders of within the process. So exciting. I think the city see it as a template for how we can look at those other communities across that water and more widely across those neighbourhoods in Liverpool. So really, really excellent process.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think Everton, despite a poor end to the football season, the work that they've done in the city this year has been fantastic. Like you say, the Legacy project, working with yourselves on the L4 regeneration and the stadium itself. It's been a great year for them off the pitch. We've had a couple of questions from the audience, which I'd like to throw to the panel now, if I may. Bill, I'll come to you first with this one, and then perhaps Alan and Nicola, you might want to come in on this. Is there a worry that recent reports regarding the council will affect international investment in the city? So obviously we're talking about how we can recover. Is the city going to be impacted by those reports in terms of that inward investment?
I think the key is exactly what's happening now, is how the city is responding to that, the report. And we know now that the City Council have accepted the Cala report and have accepted and moving forward with the improvement plan. So that's the key to it. And I think actually what it will do is improve the position of the city in the mind of international investors. We know already that there are people wanting to come back into the city. We know from a retail and hospitality perspective that there are operators coming into the city. There are new bars opening, there are new restaurants opening. There are potentially, and Ian will pick this up, but potentially other retail uses coming into the city centre. So that's just on the, already happening, and that's probably local, national investment, but also the fact that the city's perception internationally is still strong. You know, all cities have issues. I always say that our city is over 800 years old. We've dealt with scandal in the past. We've dealt with issues in the past. It's how we pick ourselves up, and as Scousers, how we move forward as a city. And that's the key to it. So I think it will only strengthen Liverpool's reputation moving forward. We've already seen that, haven't we, in the fact that how Liverpool has been the place that has put its hand up when the testing pilot was required back in November, but also as we took part in those pilot events. We didn't take part in those pilot events just so people could go to a business meeting or people could go to a club or a festival. We took part in those pilot events so the whole of the country could start to open up, and we're seeing that already. So I think Liverpool is in a good place. Yes, we acknowledge what's happened in the past. We deal with that, we move on, we deal with it in the right way.
Fantastic. Nicola, do you want to come in on that investment question?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think actually the results of the findings of the Cala report actually can do a great deal of positive for Liverpool. I think that it is seen as a new era. I think that historically there have been perceptions about Liverpool from an investor perspective, and perhaps there have been perceptions of it not being a place for new entrants to come into. We've seen more calls from institutional investors since the Cala report than before. There's more investment interest in Liverpool now because of this sense of a new era. I think the other thing from a Liverpool from an investment perspective that has been true for a long time is the ability to increase rate of return. And that's, you know, at the end of the day, investors are investing because they want to get a return on what they're putting in. And I think, you know, the Cala report in isolation is important, but let's not lose sight of other fantastic things. At the moment, as Bill said, the response to the pandemic, the role of Liverpool in the response to the pandemic has been extraordinary. I think free port status, potential role of Liverpool as a location for movement of goods is going to be really exciting from an investor perspective once we know exactly what that means from a development and economic. Liverpool's position on the UK map from a trade perspective really important. So there's lots of different angles for Liverpool, and actually, in a way, I think the council will have been glad when they received it. They've accepted it, and now they can move on positively in the context of it, and that makes it a very attractive investment from a very attractive location from an investment perspective.
Brilliant, thanks, Nicola. Ian, we'll come back to you. Moving back to retail. You were appointed as Liverpool One's estate director earlier this year, and you were given the task of driving the shopping centre forward. Now, I know you mentioned before that footfall is up and average spend is up. That could potentially just be a bit of, pent-up demand and a bit of a bounce. How do you maintain that long term?
That's a really good question. So yes, Liverpool One has always traded ahead of UK averages for both footfall and sales since opening. So it is a bit of a hard act to follow in that regard. But what we do here is we use data. We use data in such a way that it sets us apart from a lot of other destinations across the country. We have a few systems here that are set up to monitor that footfall and bring in those sales. But crucially now, it's about knowing who the customer is and what the customer wants. Very, very customer focused in our approach. So when we're looking at brands that we might want to bring in, when we're looking at events that we might want to hold, it's all about knowing whether the customer wants them. Now, there is at the moment a gap it's in our footfall numbers between where we were at in 2019 to where we are now. But fortunately, we have the technologies to identify who isn't here. So we can look at certain demographics, certain geographical locations that perhaps aren't visiting in the volumes that they were previously. Pre-pandemic, we were looking at marginal gains in these areas. How can we nudge this by 0.5%? How can we add on, 50 pence per average spend? Now it's almost like a bit of a back to basics, as it has been for everybody in business over the course of the last 12 months. Focus upon what's important. Who's coming here? What do they think of it when they are here? What do they like? What don't they like? And then, more importantly even, who isn't coming here that previously was, and why aren't they coming here? Are they going somewhere else? And we've got tech that can ascertain that sort of thing as well. So it's getting back to the real basics and the core of what we do, which is based upon customer insights. So it isn't all just about counting how many people come here. That's great, and it's a good health check to know each day. But increasingly, it's about knowing who they are and what's driving them.
Okay, excellent. So using technology to sort of assess the trends and then act accordingly, I suppose. We actually have a question from the audience for you, Ian. Don't know how much you can say about this, but it says, do you expect any more major retail losses such as Debenhams? And if so, how can Liverpool One prepare? And I guess on top of that, what's the plan for Debenhams? 30
minutes it took to get to that. If I had a pound for every time I get asked about Debenhams, I'd build Bramley-Moore Stadium myself. It's a hot topic. I'll take the first part first. Using that data as we do, it tells us how the stores are performing. So we have an idea, we have a very good idea of what's performing well and what's not performing well. And we're very proactive, or the landlord here is very proactive in their approach to leasing, in that there is no point in us having a brand here that isn't working, that isn't trading well, because that's telling us that the customers don't want it. And if there was brands that the customers don't want, it reduces the chances of their visit. So they're very proactive in brands coming out as much as they are bringing new brands in. With that in mind, Debenhams doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, the fact that it's closed. Beyond our data, there have been plenty of things in the media over the last few years about their struggle. So it didn't come as a surprise. What it does mean, having that data, which is the head start, if you like, is the leasing team here have worked very hard for the last couple of years at what potential solutions would be if the worst happens to Debenhams. And now it has happened. We look to activate some of those plans. When we spoke last week, Dan, I was hopeful that I'd be able to come on this call and tell people where we're at. Just a few legal E's to cross and I's to dot, and then I'll be able to tell people actually what is going to happen with Debenhams. But I think the good thing is that there's been a huge amount of interest, and there remains a huge amount of interest in Liverpool. If brands are looking for somewhere to go, and I'm talking here particularly about retail brands, if they're looking for somewhere to go in the UK, yes, they will always look at London. But beyond London, increasingly, Liverpool is the first place that they want to go to. And it's because Liverpool is very fashion-led and leisure-led. The people wear and live their lifestyle. So if you are looking for somewhere, then Liverpool is the place. The next question that people always ask me about Debenhams is, well, will it be a retailer or will it be leisure? Because over time, things have changed a lot. There's been a bit of a swing from retail towards leisure. When Liverpool One first opened, there was only 13 places to eat and drink, and that included the likes of coffee shops in Debenhams and John Lewis. There's now over 50 locations where you can eat and drink, and that's just that swing in the market for the overall experience of coming and eating, drinking, as well as shopping. So when it comes to Debenhams, what I will say is that the majority of the unit will remain retail, which is a surprise to people. It is a surprise. People don't expect that. But again, it comes back to the core of the fact that we are a retail destination, and it's a destination where brands want to be. Do I think more brands will go? Well, let's not be naive. Brands will go. Fashions change, cultures change, things happen. What I would say is, as brands have dropped off over the years, even if you go back to the very first one that was dropping off the agenda when we're looking at something like Woolworths, things come in, things replace. And I am sure and I'm confident that there will be increased investment in Liverpool over time. at some point this week, we'll probably be in a position to confirm a significant investment in the estate in the New Look building. So New Look are vacated and move over to the old Gap unit. The brand that's going into that building is spending more on its fit out than it has anywhere else in the world, with the exception of Times Square.
Wow.
That shows you the commitment to Liverpool.
Absolutely.
So that one this week.
Yeah, definitely. Well, lots of exciting things going on, and we'll be watching that closely. Alan, I want to come back to you now. We've had another excellent audience question from Adam Hall. Do keep them coming in, by the way. So Adam says, what are your thoughts on where the market is at in terms of apartment development underpinned by fractional investment sales?
Yeah, I knew Adam would try and trip me up with this one. Look, Liverpool's a strange market because it 90% of the development that's happened over the last 6, 7, 8, 9 years has been underpinned by fractional, and hence why we probably had so many of the problems. Firstly, there's a huge demand for non-fractional sales apartments. So there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people who want to live in the city centre, but they want to live in what I would term as a proper apartment. They don't want to live in an apartment with 95% of tenants as their neighbours. But for a developer, the challenge a developer has got is getting those things traditionally bank funded is very difficult to do. So they go down the fractional sales route. Down the fractional sales route, they are, whether we like it or not, they are able to finance schemes by what I would term as very often overselling those apartments. We all know the challenges and issues with regards to guaranteed yields. Don't get me wrong, there's some developers who do it correctly. There's some developers who do it with good morals and they build a good quality product. But yeah, our biggest concern and beef with the market is that we are 90% of the developments coming out of the ground is fractionally sale driven. Mm-hmm. It's adding to the supply of rental stock that we probably don't need to add to the supply of rental stock at the moment, unless they're done very well. And it's depriving the city of what the market actually wants. So we've got this, we're building, you've seen in my reports, and I've discussed it before, that we're building the wrong type of stock. Mm. But I can understand from a development viewpoint. If I was a developer, would I do a 100 apartment scheme, basically fully sold off plan, or develop a scheme out there, which, you might sell 50, 60, 70% off plan, the rest when it's built. It's a slightly lower margin doing fractional sales, but it pretty much gives you a guarantee. But I think the world will turn at some point. You look at Manchester, where you're able to develop proper resi stock in Manchester for sale to owner occupiers because the values are much better. And I think Liverpool will get to the point where the values rise to a level where the better developers or the more traditional developers aim for that owner occupier market. So that's the basics of where we're up to at the moment. So.
Okay. I want to come back to something you said earlier as well. There's a lot of developers in there who you said, they're trying to develop big residential schemes, but they've never refurbished a terrace house. How can we encourage more of the big name developers, so to speak, to come to Liverpool, and why aren't they coming currently?
Show them a colour report. That's how you develop them to come in. Yeah, I mean,
do you think it's down to that?
Oh, it's I've not been probably 15, 20 times somebody's come to me over the report and said, what do you do? And as Nicola and Bill have said, I think it's the best thing that's happened to Liverpool for 15, 20 years. It's there was nothing in that report that we didn't already know in the city. Mm-hmm. And I hate to say that because there's some shocking things that came out, but it's like the kitchen sinking in a listed company with a new chief exec. We've kitchen sinked the city. So, there's been so many companies, so many investors, so many developers, regional, national, international, who want to come and develop in this city. And I think you're right, Dan, they are going to be the guys who have got the funding. So if we get an international developer or a national developer comes in here, buys a site for 5-10 million, develops a 70 million pound resi block together with a hotel scheme, they can fund it. They don't need that specific bank funding. So the Colour report might actually be the catalyst that gives the city what it needs from a residential perspective. So the days after that report, I literally cried into my own hands for a couple of days, thinking it's time to retire and get out of here. But actually, within a week, you start to say, hold on a minute, this could be the best thing that's happened to the city. It's sort of thrown out there what we all knew was going on, and the kitchen sink is very often the start of the recovery that, whether it's a company, a city, or whatever, very, very often needs. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicola, I'd like to bring you in. Obviously, Alan, Ian, and Bill, they work in Liverpool every day. You do a lot of work in Liverpool, but you're also in other places in the northwest. I just wonder, from the outside looking in, what is Liverpool like as a prospect to work in, and how does working with the council, for example, compare to working with other authorities?
What a question to put me on the spot. All my clients and everywhere I work down are fantastic places to work. Liverpool, do you know, it's really interesting because I'm based in Manchester, and I think when my career first started, there was a real tension driving over the M62 and having the audacity to go and advise in Liverpool. And I think it's almost linked to some of this discussion that there was this sense of not even that Liverpool do things differently, but Liverpool is its own place, and we have our own. Liverpool has its own way and its own people, and we always used to joke about it professionally about that dynamic, that Manchester-Liverpool dynamic. I think over the years we've maintained both a Liverpool and a Manchester office, and we've done that because of the strength of the Liverpool market and the Liverpool City region market. That office is multidisciplinary, it's general practice, it's transactional, it's planning, it's regeneration, management, really by work from the Liverpool City region, primarily from the Liverpool City region. And that's really exciting for us, and it's been a real commitment to that particular area over the last few years. From my perspective, in terms of working all over the country and coming into Liverpool as a place to do business and a place to work, there's just the guys have already said it, there's just a real culture. I think I've always been very fortunate to have good relationships, predominantly with the public sector, actually, within the city region and within the city. And there's always just been a very positive, very proud attitude. And over the years, that idea of driving over the M62 being an issue has almost eroded. It's the opposite now in Liverpool. Liverpool wants to be seen as the place that is exported to the rest of the UK as best practice, but it's also incredibly willing to learn from the rest of the UK from a development regeneration perspective, and indeed globally. So I think the culture has changed over those sort of 15, 20 years, but it remains one of our most vibrant, engaged, exciting offices across the UK, to be honest, in terms of a place to do business. It's good fun.
Brilliant. Bill, one of the things that's happened in all of the council goings on this year is the regeneration director, Nick Kavanagh, was arrested, released, not been charged, and then subsequently he left the council. Not having someone in that role, is that going to hold the city back in any way, do you think?
I think clearly having senior management for a local authority not in position, and also at the same time we also lost very sadly through his death, Ron O'Donnell died at the beginning of 2020. It left two major directorates, and it does give difficulties at how any organisation runs with. But Calorie Report has allowed, and the acceptance and the implementation of the improvement plan allows Tony Reeves as the CEO to restructure that department, restructure his senior management, and restructure how those departments operate. So again, there have been difficulties, but we're moving forward, aren't we now, and focusing on reopening the city. Obviously, the other issue, if you work in the city centre at the moment, is the traffic getting in and out of the city centre, because the city centre connectivity scheme, which is a tremendous asset for the city when it's completed, but it's creating enormous difficulties for anybody trying to move around the city. So I always say that you need to crack eggs to make an omelette, don't you? And there have been a lot of eggs being cracked at the moment, but I think that omelette's coming towards perfection and we're moving forward. But just going back to a point about development, what we need in the city now, and we are doing that, is to look at what is the place that we want in our city? What do we want our neighbourhoods to look like? How do we improve the city for local people who live in the suburbs and because of COVID have found that actually suburbs are a good place to work from, and how do we move forward? How do we make the place better for all our citizens and all of the people that come and visit us? And I think moving forward, you will see that Liverpool will start to do that in ways that we have done in the past. Look at some of our grand boulevards, our beautiful buildings and space in the city centre. And from that, I've got every optimism about Liverpool moving forward.
Excellent. Ian, I'll bring you in on that. We spoke before this meeting about what you would like to see from the council and from the city going forward to drive regeneration, not just in a retail sense. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I think similar to something that Bill touched upon there, I think that the wider city has some wonderful buildings and in part fantastic architecture. One of the comments that we've drawn a lot here in not just recent times, but there's probably been an uplift of it in recent times, is about the standards of presentation of the city in general. So we're talking about what I would class as some of the real basics. We're talking about the cleanliness and the appearance. There is a difference here, and I know that Liverpool One, we are fortunate in that we have a budget which is paid for by our occupiers to ensure that our cleaning and presentation is of a high standard. I would say that going around other areas of the city, it's clearly a struggle. There's clearly a budget matters there, but the standards are not where I believe that they should be, and I would be surprised if anybody would argue the case. I think the management of the city centre as well, in terms of ensuring that it is ready for business in the way that you would expect a city to be presented with such significant tourist economy. That is something that I would really like the city to focus on. All of the component parts to be a world-leading destination are here for Liverpool. We just need to make sure that we are actually delivering on them day by day by day. And as Bill said, they have things such as the Strand. The ultimate outcome there, I'm experts tell me is going to be a very free-flowing traffic route and big wide boulevards. And unlike Michael Gove, I do believe in experts. So I've got every faith in what's going to come at the other end. What we see now is a big challenge. And if you want some views on the traffic down there, you probably have to cancel the second panel and just let me go for an hour. We will get there in the end of it. We'll, as Bill said with the omelette analogy, we have got to crack the eggs. It will get there. But once that piece is done, what we have to make sure is that the rest of the city is delivering to a standard that is, to be honest, seamless through to Liverpool One. That's what I would like.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty of people in the main hall in the networking session who will share your concerns about the traffic that you'll be able to speak to. We've had some more excellent audience questions. Just firstly, there's one about design quality and architecture. We will cover that in the second session. We're speaking to Quentin Keohane from Chester Hall. He can touch on that. There is a question for Nicola and Alan, so you both contribute on this one if you like. On land supply, where and when do you see council-owned sites being released to the market as those seem the most suitable for 100 plus unit housing-led schemes? We are as well going to talk about Festival Gardens in the second session. Alan, do you want to start on that, on land supply?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a question that Nicola's probably more qualified than me to answer, but I think the thing about Liverpool, because it grew so quickly in its history, that there's a ton of land both in and around the prime city centre is pretty much done, but in the secondary areas around the city centre, that there's enough land to keep us going for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So I think the focus has got to be on those areas where there are stall developments. So the sort of Vauxhall, the Pumpfield sort of areas, and going out the other side of the city, and it's interesting what Nicola was saying earlier about the sort of, if we look at Vauxhall as a challenge deprived area, and its connectivity to the city centre is very poor. So I'd park the the sort of question about council-owned land for now. I'd say there's plenty of land out there that we've got to try and see if we can get land values to a level where the private sector can come in and develop, and start even on both all parts of our city. People talk about the donut, but we are going from prime city centre now touching into those areas where there is, there are some major challenging issues, and we've got to try and connect to those locations as well as we can. And maybe there are council-owned sites that will help in that connectivity and improve it. But there's plenty of privately owned sites that and important privately owned sites that I think we need to box off first. But Nicola might have a slightly different view.
I'm not different at all. Just to add to it, we've actually been advising the city on an area of land at Stonebridge Cross, Croxteth, council-owned site. It absolutely falls in that bracket, 100 plus homes, and probably does, from a local perspective, have people scratching their heads thinking, why isn't the council moving forwards with it? I think the thing with council-owned land at the moment, one product of the Keller report is the council are going to act very, what's the right word? Prudently, I suppose, in terms of how they deal with their assets. And I don't think there'll be any quick decisions made in that respect. But I agree with Alan that I don't think there should be any quick decisions made. I think the focus should be on making decisions around investment in general through the public sector, which create the conditions for investment in residential delivery in general across those market areas. I think what the city will do, what they are doing, and we know this through the Stonebridge Cross example, and it's linked to the question about stalled sites as well, which have actually predominantly smaller than 100 units. Some of them are sites dotted across the city. I think what the council will do is Homes England, they'll work with Combined Authority, who are incredibly mobilised and wanting to get their hands dirty in terms of regeneration delivery across the city region. And I think they'll put together more of a programme approach to delivery. I don't think there'll be any quick decisions on individuals. This will be on understanding what the stall is, understanding what investment could enable development on a material scale across. I think investment will be prioritised in that way, but I think it will be led initially through that key relationship with Homes England and the Combined Authority to understand what public funding may be available to enable more than one major site come forward, because I think that's got to be the city's priority over the next few years, more of a programme approach to delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, back to you. Obviously, we want to see increased scrutiny within the council and its decision-making processes, and to address all of the issues that were raised in the Keller report. Is there a danger, though, that increased scrutiny and new processes could really slow down, for example, the planning process, the land disposal process, at a time when Liverpool really needs to be hitting the ground running to recover from the pandemic? Is that a concern?
Yeah, it's a super question, Dan. It can work two ways. I think at the moment, from a residential perspective, we probably need to slam the brakes on a touch. So, I've spoken to plenty of developers who genuinely believe and are concerned that post the report that it is going to be very difficult to do business and to get proper schemes through. I'm dealing with one at the moment that is going to come in, and it is going to be a challenge to get it through in the timescales that we need to get it through. But in the bigger picture, I think it's probably good. I think that's probably good news. It's just going to make people, look at the scheme that they're looking to develop, looking at how they're going to finance it, because the council are going to start asking questions, rightly or wrongly, as to funding, as to track record, as that's not really a planning question to ask a developer, but that's the way it's going to go. So we are going to see those developers who aren't able to justify what they're doing, or aren't able to convince the council that actually them as a developer, they're not going to be actively encouraged to come and develop in the city, where that's right or wrong. That's what's going to happen. So I think overall, we're quite confident that there's going to be some frustrations. There's going to be some good developers who get very frustrated and they get tarnished with the same brush. But I think it's a slow process for me. We're not going to turn Liverpool into a city that's, with all the challenges gone on the last 5-10 years, into a city that's open for business. Go and get your planning permission in 6-8 weeks and off you go. That's not going to happen, but it's probably good news that isn't going to happen. It's a slow burn process from here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, excellent. Bill, we are running out of time. I want to come to you and just throw it forward a little bit and ask you what does the next 12 months hold for Liverpool, and what do you want to see in the future after the pandemic and after the Cala report?
Well, the next 12 months has in place recovery, isn't it? Hopefully we've dealt with the pandemic. The pandemic will come to an end because of vaccinations, because of the fact that we will continue to monitor ourselves, we'll continue to test ourselves, we'll continue where incidents arise that will be surge testing, and we'll deal with it and open up. My hope is that we can start to open up properly. There are other tensions hitting various sectors at the moment. One of the biggest will be skills. That needs addressing. But I think one of the things we need to do is reset, refocus, and move forward. And I think Liverpool is in a great position to be able to do that. All of the pieces are in place. We just need now to put them together and get moving.
Fantastic, and that's a great place to end our first panel of the event. It's gone quickly. Thank you so much to our panel, to Nicola, Bill, Ian, and Alan. It's been a pleasure speaking to you this morning. We're going to switch to networking mode now, so get ready to mingle. If I don't catch you in the main hall, I will see you back here for our second panel at around 11:30. But you will get a warning, so don't worry about missing it. Thanks again to our panel. It's been a pleasure having you on, and I will see everybody very shortly. Hello and welcome back to Place Northwest's Liverpool Development Update, sponsored by Pegasus and ITS. I trust the networking break was a veritable feast of virtual elbow rubbing and that you're ready for our second panel of the day. Earlier, we heard about how the events of the last year or so have impacted Liverpool's residential and retail sectors and what is being done to facilitate recovery. A political scandal and the pandemic provide the perfect opportunity for a fresh start, and we all hope Liverpool can hit the ground running as it embarks on a new era. However, if the city is to successfully move on, it must address a number of underlying issues: a slow-moving office market, a housing crisis, and the ongoing tug-of-war between the development community and the divisive UNESCO World Heritage Site designation. In this panel, we will discuss those issues and how they're being addressed. So let's crack on. I'd like to welcome to the stage our second panel, Darren Muir, Principal Planner at Pegasus Group, Gary Bowker, Regional Director at Vinci Construction, Lynn Hain, Partner and Head of Matthews and Goodman's Liverpool office, and Quentin Keohane, Director of Faulkner Chester Hall. Please could you all turn your cameras and microphones on? Just waiting for Lynn. How are we doing, everyone? Okay?
Good, thank you.
Excellent. Nice to have you here. Lynn will be joining us shortly. We'll crack on for now. Let's dive straight in with an audience question that was asked in the first panel, but I thought would be good to address in this one. Quentin, I'm going to ask you to field this one, if you would. Does a question need asking over the quality of the architecture in Liverpool? It appears that the city is becoming a storage yard for Lego box apartment blocks over destination architecture. Quentin, over to you.
Thanks for that, Dan. I think that's actually a really good question. It's something I feel really passionate about, and I think all of us in the design community do. I think you're right. There has been some examples of kind of insufficiently high quality architecture in Liverpool in the last few years. I think part of that is probably the original permissions not being enacted exactly as they should have been. I think what's really important, I think, from our point of view, is that we get kind of backup from the local authority and the planners to make sure that what's approved is what's built and what's enacted. That's checking conditions, enforcement. I think what we're hearing from the local authority is that they really feel design quality is absolutely fundamental. Liverpool is a fantastic world city. It needs the appropriate architectural quality to match that. I think got some really good designers in the city and from all over the country working here. Really positive developers who want to do good stuff. I think some of it probably harks back a little bit to what Alan was saying at the very start of the presentation about a small number of developers trying to do things at 1,300 square meter, which just isn't possible. And some of that being driven by the kind of housing market over the last 10 years. So, I think, we as architects want to do a really good job. not every building needs to be award-winning and fantastic. But I think what we need in general is, is good quality background buildings. I think we've seen, from the, terrible outcome of the Grenfell inquiry, some of the construction quality all over the country hasn't been there over the last few years. Some of that is kind of down to poor quality design and build contracts. But I think, we're working with some really good contractors at the moment, and local authority are kind of making all the right noises in terms of promoting design quality, making sure what's kind of been approved is what's been built, and making sure the end product works for Liverpool as a city. Because, you are right that there are some kind of examples of poor quality student schemes being done and housing schemes, and none of us want that. It's not good for Liverpool, as a city or for any of the design community.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for fielding that one. And remember, to our audience, please keep those questions coming in. And if you are afraid of the repercussions that might result, just do it anonymously. Quentin, another one for you while we're on the design issue. Chester Hall obviously has many schemes ongoing in Liverpool, and completed schemes. I just wonder if you could tell us how do you approach such a big portfolio, and how do you ward against everything looking the same? Essentially, we don't want everything in Liverpool to look the same. How do you avoid that with such a big body of work?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, Dan. I mean, FCH is quite a large practice. We've got almost 70 members of staff over 3 offices. So, and then over the last few years, been a number of new directors appointed. So myself here in Liverpool, Mike Gore over in Manchester, and Chris Cox in London. So we've got people from a quite diverse backgrounds. As you probably tell from my accent, I'm not Liverpudlian. So I came here to university. So I absolutely love the city. My wife is from Southport, so I've kind of settled here, made it my adopted home. But we've got quite a lot of different designers here. We've got people who are expertise in listed buildings. So we've got India buildings, municipal buildings being done at the moment. We've got people who are experts in hotels, office buildings. So we've got probably a suite of 30 or 40 really good architects. So there's not kind of 1 or 2 people driving the design here. We're obviously directors here make sure the design quality is what it needs to be, but we encourage our young designers to kind of come forward with good ideas. We work with the planning consultants, we work with and also the council to make sure that what's being put forward is of the right quality. I suppose, as I said, not everything needs to be absolutely award-winning, but there has to be a minimum bar of quality in Liverpool that we all need to strive for. I think it's kind of, I was thinking when I was listening to the earlier session, I came here to uni about 25 years ago, and Liverpool has absolutely changed massively. I remember going down to Queen Square, and it was an absolute kind of open car park, nothing there. Chavas Park, there was nothing there. So I think we shouldn't kind of forget how far Liverpool has come in terms of design quality. You've got Liverpool One, which has been a fantastic addition to the city centre. Some really high quality architecture there. So I think we can show what can be done. We just need to carry on that good work. I think I worked with Lynn a few years ago when she was Urban Splash. We were doing a number of schemes across Liverpool and Manchester. I think it's those schemes have improved Liverpool considerably. So we just need to try and make sure we continue with those best practices, and just cut out, I think, the poor bits of quality architecture which have unfortunately sprung up. And I think the council are absolutely key to doing that. And I think from what I've heard from them, they're signed up to doing that.
Excellent. Lynn, hello. I'd like to bring you in on this. Something we touched on in our briefing beforehand, the design quality question, and it links, doesn't it, to land prices and rental returns and things like that. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what you're hearing about design quality and viability of schemes as well?
Yeah, I mean it's an ongoing challenge. I think, but generally in the office market, there was a spate over recent years of some of the old architectural gems that were converted from office space to either resi or hotel schemes, and some of the older office stock is what's currently remaining. The rent levels are stifled still. Obviously there's the ongoing lack of supply, just generally causing issues within the office market currently. A recent visit, we went round the Royal Live building on Friday actually, and that's pushing the grade A headline rents now in Liverpool up a notch, and it just shows that the demand is there. We're not agents on it. You'd think I was. I've been banging on about it ever since I went round because I think it's a great scheme. Unfortunately, we weren't involved on that particular one, But the successes they've had in lettings on, you know, a new headline rent, 26.50 for Liverpool, shows that people will pay for the right product as well. And I think there's just a dearth of the right product. There's lots of fantastic schemes out there, don't get me wrong, but I think in terms of the general move towards quality, and I think almost the result of the pandemic, people are rethinking what they want out of their office space now. And a lot more of that return to work is being determined by the amenity provision and the more collaborative breakout space, and less how many desks do we need and how many people can we fit in. And it is resulting in people looking at perhaps refurbishing their existing spaces and upgrading them themselves. But I think if developers or landlords out there could continue that investment and upgrade the office schemes under their controls, I think we'd all see a vast improvement. It would help push rents up, and then has a knock-on effect really in the investment side of things. You know, it's difficult if you're an investor and you're looking at whether you develop Manchester or Liverpool at the moment. There's loads of pros for Liverpool, you know, the cultural side of things, the talent, you know, the waterfront, the hospitality offer, which we've seen, you know, despite last year and all the challenges that the hospitality sector have experienced, they've kind of come back stronger already, and we've seen new areas pop up that's really supporting that whole kind of city centre economy. But if you're looking at your straightforward returns, you could achieve 40 quid a foot in Manchester versus 26 in Liverpool. You know, it doesn't take much to do the maths and see where the investors are going to go. So I think it's this kind of cycle really, and it's, I don't know which element goes first, but to improve the quality of stock would make some great inroads into that, and then start resulting in people coming into the centre, wanting to be in the office spaces and seeing the returns and the rentals push up as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw sort of throughout lockdown a couple of big occupier deals fall through. We had BT, who were going to Pall Mall, that may not have gone away completely. Sky as well was another one. I mean, you touched on it there. Why are these big occupiers pulling out of Liverpool? And is that impacting the supply of grade A office space? Because obviously, we spoke about this beforehand, you need an occupier lined up ideally. You don't really want to be developing offices speculatively. Yeah,
I mean, it's a real shame for Pall Mall. It would be fantastic to see that scheme, and I think the city, particularly the commercial core, is crying out for that to have a kickstart. They're not going to do it without a pre-let in place, and unfortunately, you know, BT falling away has kind of put the blocks on that. I think the public-private sector support is invaluable to get these schemes moving forward. We can see the outturns on the Knowledge Quarter in that respect, and you know, it's great to see that part of the city. There's quite a lot of untapped potential in the geography as well. I think this morning's panel alluded to the fact that there's lots of scope within Liverpool, you know, the physical geography of places that can be redeveloped or developments brought forward. You know, the 10 streets, Liverpool Waters, kind of continuing progress. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you can put it down to the fact it's Liverpool. You know, BT, for example, chose to go somewhere else over Liverpool. You know, the noises were all there to start with. I think last year has made people kind of perhaps rethink approaches across businesses, companies, generally speaking. Mentioned earlier, there's so many positives for Liverpool to encourage inward investment and big business to come in. I think it's a kind of wholesale public-private sector joined up approach to continue that attraction for companies to come in.
Brilliant, thank you, Lynn. Gary, we'll come to you. Speaking of public-private sector partnerships, you're working with Vinci on Festival Gardens, obviously council-owned land. Can you give us an update of where that's up to and what the plan is long term for that site?
Yeah, of course, Dan. Our client is Liverpool City Council Direct at the moment. So our current contract is for the land remediation package on to basically bring the Festival Gardens site to a usable plot of land that the NHBC will support and buy into, and Homes England. So we're on site at the moment. Our program runs through till the middle of 2023. The majority of the physical works will be finished in early 2023, and then there's a period of validation and testing that takes place post the physical works before the full certification from the NHBC comes through. And the developer on there is looking towards the sort of Q3, maybe Q4 of 2023 to start to move forward ultimately the housing scheme with the plan for 1,500 new homes, quite a mix of different types of accommodation, different tenures, some build to rent, some open sale, potentially some retirement living down there as well. And that's sort of an 8-year timeline to develop out all the phases down there at Festival Gardens. The master plan is still evolving, it's still developing. The master land agreement between the developer and the council is going through its final knockings at the moment. But there's also the southern grasslands element to the site as well. So this is what we deem the DZ, the development zone to the north, where all the housing will go, and then the southern grasslands, which will be what it says really. It will be a space with no housing development on it, 2 quite large landforms being created there to give views, a bit of refurbishment of the existing car park, but ultimately it's all about creating a footpath network, picnic areas, stopping places that'll have good views over the Mersey. And there'll be a net gain of approximately 4,000 trees on that site. The perception of Festival Gardens is that it's losing trees. It's actually gaining about 4,000 trees and 30,000 square metres of grassland planting in the final scheme. So be a really impressive community facility right next to the new development zone. So we're speaking about quality. There's a huge investment there from the council, Homes England, and the Liverpool City region funding that's creating a community, not just a block of housing.
Yeah, no, fantastic, and obviously we've heard on various Place North West events about the lack of brownfield land and the greenbelt debate. This is a 23-acre brownfield site. Most councils would be very, very lucky to have that, and they'd be very grateful to have that. It's very important that they get this right, isn't it?
It is. It's also, quite a brave and a bold move as well. It is currently one of the UK's largest land remediation schemes. So in terms of the remediation phase we're in now, one of the biggest going on in the UK. So that's quite a bold and brave move by the City Council to bring back to life an area that's got some great potential right on the Mersey. Speaking about quality, there's a real opportunity for quality down there.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic, thanks Gary. Darren, we'll bring you in. 1,500 homes there at Festival Gardens in the coming years, 8 years I think you said, Gary. But there is a housing shortage in Liverpool, isn't there? Could you elaborate on what's going on there at the moment in the housing sector?
Yeah, certainly. So part of the problem that Liverpool has had over recent years is an over-reliance on the apartment-led market. So whilst on paper, you can look at Liverpool and say, okay, they're not too far off meeting their housing targets. They're not meeting the right type of housing, even if in some years they are meeting the overall number. So specifically family-style housing, which Festival Gardens will go a long way to help contribute towards that. But Liverpool has also never had a policy in place for ensuring the delivery of particular tenures of housing. So that's why Festival Gardens will be quite encouraging to see that mix that Gary talked about through the open market, perhaps discounted open market for first-time buyers, social rented, retirement living, etc. Because that's what will make it a successful community. In Liverpool, the way they've tried to meet numbers in the past is by using for example, a lot of the student-led housing schemes in the city centre, and using the assumption that for every 5 studio apartments built for students in the city centre, you were releasing one family home that would be used as an HMO in an area like Wavertree off Smithtown Road. So, of course, that's unfortunately never materialised, and the HMO market is stronger than ever in South Liverpool. And I think that's because the studio apartments for students in the city centre and HMOs of Smithtown Road catered for very different markets within that student population. So unfortunately, Liverpool still doesn't have an answer to how they're going to deliver that required demand of family housing.
Right. And Darren, we've heard from various people in Liverpool that the planning process within the City Council has not ground to a halt, but slowed down significantly, certainly since the turn of the year, even more so than during the pandemic. Some people are saying that this is a legacy of Joe Anderson's arrest, that things have slowed down, there's been a reticence to approve schemes. Is that something that you're experiencing?
Sorry, did you say Darren or Gary?
Darren.
Apologies.
I think it would be perhaps unfair to land it purely on the doorstep of the Collar report and the investigations into Joe Anderson. I think it's something that we have seen, as you mentioned, across every local authority, but particularly in Liverpool and in the Northwest, we've seen an unprecedented number of planning applications. February was a record number that was then beat in March. So the sheer volume of applications, compounded by the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, have led to a real resource issue in local planning authorities. And Liverpool has some fantastic town planners, but if they don't have the time to properly resource certain projects, then the inevitable outcome is that there will be a delay in reaching decisions. And we're seeing that through an increase of appointments for non-determination appeals, which is not the preferred route to go down, but some people find that is the only option.
Mm-hmm. Quentin, have you got a view on that? What's your experience with the City Council's planning authority been like recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just probably mirror what Darren said. You know, there's some fantastic officers there, and we've had quite a number of schemes which we had to get meaningful starts on site by, I think it was April or May this year, when the government granted an extension because of the coronavirus pandemic. And the officers worked with us very practically to get those schemes on site. But a couple of really exciting PRS schemes, which we talked about earlier, that they're just breaking ground at the moment. I can't quite name them at the moment, but the planning officers worked with us to make sure those schemes could actually start on site, and that investment was secured for Liverpool. I think, as Darren said, there's been an absolutely massive explosion in domestic type applications, which, you know, we've seen from a massive demand for kind of suburban type housing, which we have already discussed. That's probably kept the planners quite busy. I think what we're starting to see now is that the bigger city centre applications are starting to kind of warm up again after going quiet for the last 12 months. So I think I think from our side, from a development community side, we just want to make sure that the planners have got adequate resources to deal with those large applications. You know, you can do planning applications that are costing hundreds of thousands, and developers want to make sure that there's a partner on the other side that's able to respond. You know, it needs to be a robust process where, you know, we're challenged and we make sure there's good design, proper development in the right places. But, you know, developers want to have, you know, somebody they can rely on and want to get, you know, good, timely answers. And by doing that, I think Liverpool's just going to encourage more and better development, which is kind of what all of us want to see. Just quickly touching back on what Lynn said on the office market, I think we use the word kind of quite a bit in terms of it's a catalyst or kind of a game changer, but I think India Buildings, which we've been working on for the last 4 or 5 years with LNG, it's going to be a real game changer for the business district in terms of kind of office space and revitalising that area. There's going to be, I think, approximately 4,000 jobs there over the next 12 months brought in. So I think that will really change the business district of Liverpool. Sorry, Lynn, just touching back on what you said in that, because I think it's pretty fundamental. I think that will knock on to all the other buildings around it. And a lot of those over recent years, we've seen them going towards more PD development for kind of housing and that. And I think the city needs a mix there. It needs kind of that good office space and the residential kind of city centre living.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on, the topic of joined up development, the one area that we mentioned prior to the briefing was 10 streets and how the momentum seems to have slowed down there. Quentin, what's your view on that, and where do you see growth in other areas of the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think 10 Street is a really exciting area of the city. It's kind of, it's got some fantastic character buildings there. I think what's challenging is to kind of get a little momentum up and going. There's quite a challenging development brief from the city council there in terms of discouraging residential development and trying to promote kind of office startup developments. I think that's probably maybe lessons learned from the Baltic area a little bit, but I think you need a little bit of both. You need the investment from the resi end of it, and I think so. There needs to be kind of a realistic approach there to kind of get it going, but get the type of development going that we want. I mean, I think one area we are seeing a lot of interest and growth in is kind of suburban apartment schemes, kind of high quality ones. So what we're seeing is a lot of developers looking at downsizing opportunities. So on the Wirral, South Liverpool, we've got a lot of developers looking at kind of apartment schemes between 10 and 20 units in kind of key infill sites. That's a real kind of growth area. We've just done a really exciting one starting in Carnatic Road in South Liverpool, and there's massive market interest. So I think, Darren, as well as kind of that family type housing, we see a big area of growth is kind of that downsizing high quality apartments in suburban and kind of urban locations. I think Alan touched on it earlier. There's a real shortage of high quality apartments within the city centre and the suburbs. So that's definitely an area for growth, I think, that we're seeing lots of demand in.
Okay, brilliant. Gary, from a contractor's perspective, because we'll talk about this in more detail later, but because of the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation, there is a limit on height generally in Liverpool. And I know that Vinci does that kind of scheme as opposed to sort of low rise.
Yeah.
Does that make Liverpool a less attractive prospect for Vinci? And where do you view the areas of growth going forward?
Does it make it a less attractive proposition? Not really, Dan. No. There are still, some fairly significant buildings of height being constructed in Liverpool. Particularly along the waterfront, and what Beijing have just done with Moda and down on Liverpool Waters. So it doesn't make it a less attractive proposition to us. Absolutely not. In some ways, building very high is very risky, so not too high would be good. Particularly scared of heights like me. But in terms of the workload moving forward, it certainly, from our point of view, has slowed down in the Liverpool City region. But there are definitely signals of opportunities there in the, let's call them, the more medium term for us.
Okay.
And it'll be interesting to see how the current material price inflation impacts even further on the viability of some schemes, because we've got supply chain pressures that we've probably not seen the likes of for 10 years or more at the moment, that we're all battling against, and that's only going to compound further the viability problem that Lynn was alluding to before, really.
Right. Yeah, we mentioned in the first panel about stalled schemes. With the material price increase, do you see perhaps more stalled schemes in the not too distant future?
It's certainly got the potential. I think I heard that it was spoke about this morning that, trying to run appraisals at 130 quid a square foot versus 170 to build. I'm not even convinced that for the quality that Liverpool is wanting, that 170 a square foot even exists anymore, to be honest with you. We've run a number of cost plans for various developers on schemes in Liverpool this year alone, and of the three that we've done, none of them have stacked up at the moment.
Interesting. Lynn, coming back to you on the UNESCO point, I know everyone has an opinion on this. Has it become sort of an albatross around Liverpool's neck, and is it stifling development, do you think? It seems to me that Liverpool is sort of straining at the leash a little bit and moving further and further away from it. What's your view on it?
I mean, that is my personal view, it was nice to have, or is nice to have. I don't think it's the label that puts Liverpool on the global stage. I don't think people choose to come to Liverpool because it has UNESCO World Heritage status. I think it's world famous for lots of reasons, and I don't think, in my view, it would be the most detrimental thing if it was lost in response to a progression in development and expansion of the city.
Okay.
I think it becomes a point where you've got to weigh up the two, and for me, it would be go for the redevelopment and progression for the city, really.
Okay. It should be said that the council is working with UNESCO to try and essentially strike an accord between development and preservation. They released a framework last year, I believe. Quentin, you have a different view on this.
Yeah, well, I think Lynn is right. We need, obviously, new development needs to happen, but I think we should strive as much as we can to retain it. I think it just needs kind of good designers, good urban planners, good landscapers to kind of make sure that whatever we're doing, works with the high quality architecture in the city and kind of complements it. I think that's what makes Liverpool so different. It's got some absolutely amazing buildings. It's Dockland infrastructure. It's fantastic, and I think there's no reason why we can't do big high quality schemes and be respected. I think there just needs to be the right quality and be done with the right kind of right intent. I suppose just going back to Gary, just in terms of a couple of schemes which are stalled, I mean, we're hopeful that quite a lot of those schemes will come back, and there's a couple which we're working on with Legacy at the moment. One up by Erskine Business Estate called The Element, so that one is looking to restart. So there's a little bit of good news there. And there's another one on Parliament Street, which was a stalled scheme by Asset Corp, who ran into financial problems, and that one's restarting with Legacy as well. So I think we shouldn't be too downhearted by these schemes that are stopped. I remember back in Ireland, you got loads of these kind of ghost estates after the last kind of crash, and eventually, if the market demand is there, you get good developers, good people coming in. These schemes will get built out. I think we just need to kind of stick with it and just make these schemes as good as we can be. And I think in a few years' time, get these real key sites developed, and Liverpool will start to turn a corner with these kind of stalled schemes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the Legacy has stepped in on a couple of occasions to pick up schemes out of receivership or administration, and Nexus Residential as well. The Element one that you spoke about there that's the Rise, isn't it? The former Prime site scheme, I believe. So it is good that developers are stepping in to pick up these schemes, isn't it? Darren, what's your view on that?
Certainly, yeah, definitely. No one likes looking out of their office window in a half-built shell. So, yeah, the sooner you can get these back up and running, the better.
And what's your take on the heritage issue, Darren? It seems to me that Liverpool actually does quite a good job of preserving its history. If you look around the city, there's good examples of that. Do you think that the UNESCO designation is stifling development?
I think regardless of whether or not we retain the UNESCO designation, those heritage assets still exist, so they still play an important part of the context of any future development, and their listed status and whatever designation they have, whether it's a conservation area or the Grade 1 listed graces, it's all going to play a part. So UNESCO, much like Historic England, will be a statutory consultee to any planning application, and what's required is a pragmatic decision maker, in this example, the Liverpool City Council, to weigh up those issues and determine whether or not there's any harm, and if there is harm that exists to those heritage assets, whether that harm is significant enough to justify refusing that development or stifling that development, reducing the height, for example. Alternatively, whether or not there's greater public benefits that overcome that objection. And I think it's a case of having to work together with those statutory consultees, because those heritage assets aren't going anywhere, and they're a key driver for investment in the city, and a key driver as to why people want to develop in those areas.
Yeah. Have you had any experiences working in pre-application discussions with the council where you've submitted a tall scheme and been told to reduce the height?
Yes, I recently completed a pre-application discussion about a hotel on the Strand, where the building that used to exist, that was demolished in the war, was 9 stories. We were looking at building back a building at 10 or 11 stories. We had extensive meetings with conservation officers, the urban design officer, the planning officers, and through those discussions we were able to design a solution that provided the height that the client wanted and protected those heritage assets. In this case, for example, it was views of the roof of the India building from Pier Head, which those long distance views needed to be preserved, and there was a design solution to that, and we were able to find that through those discussions. So it's not a case of just saying, no, there's a cap, you can't go above a certain story. It's all got to be site specific.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Darren. We'll go to an audience question now. We have touched on this when we were talking about officers before, Lynn, but it's a good question and quite a direct one. So it says, is the lack of Grade A office space in the city still a problem after the pandemic? So we spoke about the lack of movement in the office market. I think, according to Avison Young's most recent report, 24,500 square foot was let in Q1, which was the second lowest of the big 9 cities outside of London. Is that lack of Grade A space a problem and going to be a problem moving forward, Lynn?
Yeah, I think, well, it's the $1 million question, isn't it? It kind of relates to the future of the office space and what people are going to come back to or not going to come back to, depending on business strategies. I think the only thing that's absolutely definite at the moment is it's not going to be the same as before. And I think we've had a whole raft of clients with different requirements as a result of last year. I think the key is we've all been able to work from home and work remotely, and I think everyone acknowledges it's all possible. Today's webinar being a prime example, but I think we'd all agree the face-to-face element is still needed and wanted. A client that we spoke to recently, we're looking at closing a fairly significant size office, but they having canvassed the staff have rejected that outright to say, no, we don't want to work from home on a permanent basis. We need that interaction, social engagement, but they will come back in a different shape and form. So I think the Grade A question, the lack of supply is still an issue and it still needs addressing. People are going to still want to come back to the office. The figures are quiet at the moment, the market's quiet at the moment, but I think, from speaking to peers in the market, we feel like it's a bit of a hiatus at the moment, and people are kind of using this moment in time to take stock a little bit and plan what that return to work might look like, and whether their footprint needs to change or whether it's the same space they're coming back into, but they're going to use it differently. I don't think that detracts from the Grade A question at all. I think it's just businesses might occupy that space slightly differently, but the demand for that space will still be there fundamentally.
Yeah, thank you very much. Gary, I wonder if you have a view on this. Is it a case of build it and they will come, or is it kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg? Is there a lack of occupiers because there's a lack of Grade A, or is there a lack of Grade A because there's a lack of interest from occupiers? What's your view on that?
I think Liverpool's got a really good opportunity to link its talent pools to its business space requirements. The Knowledge Quarter is a good example of that. We've got some really, leading examples in life sciences, creative technologies that are going to demand, if not in the short term, the medium term, some form of Grade A office space. So I think the key is to, and we've seen some of the other northern cities do this, sort of connect the requirement for workspace to the talent pools and the specialisms that the city is developing. You know, Liverpool really is, with certainly at Paddington and the wider Knowledge Quarter and beyond, really is becoming world renowned for what it's doing down there, and we need to capitalise on that, and we need to use that as a springboard for office space for those kind of companies. But then the spin-off from the support services that those companies will need will create the snowball effect, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But also, you know, going back to what Lynn said before, the public-private partnerships, the sort of the city council being an enabler in all of this, in units for developers and investors to create the office space that's needed to attract the right kind of people. So yeah, I think there's an intrinsic link between the talent pools that exist and the industries we're trying to attract, and getting the space right for them, in the locations that are right for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a prime example of that is the Spine, obviously, in Paddington Village, which completed recently. Royal College of Physicians are in there, and it's built to their specifications. Quentin, on the office point, are you seeing a lot of applications, a lot of clients approaching you to design office space, or are you seeing a lot of sort of office to resi conversions? I know that you're working on one at Gladstone House. What's the picture there in terms of offices?
Yeah, there is demand for offices. I think the challenge is it's quite hard in Liverpool to kind of build speculative offices. You know, it's quite risky, isn't it? I think that's, you know, build it and they'll come. It's like the Bill and Ted thing, isn't it? You know, it's difficult. I think it might need the city council or central government to give some support there to kind of get some of that office space in place, because, you know, if you're a big business looking to relocate one of your regional offices here, if there's no kind of available space, it's quite a long process to get that, you know, space there. And, you know, if there's available space in Manchester, you know what's going to happen. Liverpool's going to lose that opportunity. We are still seeing quite a lot of interest in kind of permitted development, change of use from office space to residential. Now, I know that's been, you know, controversial in terms of quality of those spaces. You know, that's kind of a national issue in terms of a lack of control on kind of unit size, amenity. I mean, Liverpool are bringing in a new kind of development plan, which is impacting kind of general developments in terms of apartments. You know, they're looking towards national space standards, more social and affordable. I think Darren probably will have come across this on schemes as well recently, and that's a bit of a, you know, challenge. All the developers in Liverpool are having to kind of get their heads around moving from less restrictions to kind of what I think is probably better, you know, standards that they're existent around a lot of the rest of the country. And I think we've seen with this pandemic, we need kind of high quality apartments, which have got kind of outside space, good amenity space, good kind of apartment size. And that's a bit of a challenge with these permitted development ones, to try and make sure that those same kind of levels of amenity and quality are there. We've done some good ones recently, but I think what, you know, all of us want to avoid is schemes that we kind of over time don't function properly and aren't kind of sustainable places to live. So I think it can be done well, these PD conversions. It just needs the kind of right developers and the city council keeping an eye on them to make sure that they're being done properly. In terms of kind of new office space, I think as you mentioned at the very start, Dan, the loss of the BT let on Pall Mall was a real kind of big blow for Liverpool in terms of, you know, not getting that scheme going. That's like one of the key sites in the business district, and although there's a lot of sites around that which we've got schemes starting at the moment, tend to be more kind of PRS, resi type ones. But we need those big employers in Liverpool to kind of generate that base of income, you know, those well-paying jobs, and that kind of turns everything. We've got the visitor economy going quite strongly, but I think, you know, Liverpool has always had to compete with Manchester for those kind of jobs, those businesses, and Manchester's kind of got that critical mass. But Liverpool's got, you know, fantastic universities, brilliant infrastructure, you know, great buildings, and lots of good opportunity sites. So I think we've got to like play up on those, and, you know, it probably is a part, as we've just said, you know, and a little bit of public-private. Gary touched on it in terms of getting a little bit of investment to get the ball rolling, and then, you know, the private sector will probably step in at that stage and kind of keep it going. So that's kind of how we see it at the moment.
Okay. There is an audience question, which I'm going to aim at you, Darren, very shortly, about affordable homes. But firstly, Lynn, on Pall Mall, obviously the BT letting fell away. Development has slowed as a result. What do you envisage happening there if a big letting a big occupier doesn't come back into the market, that will have to be redesigned and rethought, surely.
I mean, possibly it's a kind of back to the drawing board in terms of the scheme, whether there's a lesser scheme that can be brought forward. But I think it absolutely requires some kind of public sector intervention, support, funding to support it and get it off the ground. Maybe it's a more phased approach than was initially intended. It would just, I think even to start on a small scale would be a bit of a catalyst for the rest of that development there, would be key to get it going. And almost from anyone's perspective, seeing something happening there, obviously it wasn't particularly well received initially that the green space was removed, and now it's a kind of empty mud bath that people are looking at. It's quite visible from plenty of office schemes in the vicinity. So some kind of activity on site, whatever form that takes, I think would be a positive step forward.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Then do you think it's going to need something like Paddington, where the council kind of took a real leading role there to kind of get that going and get a key anchor tenant? And you think it's going to be?
I think so.
I mean,
it's obviously worked well on the Knowledge Quarter site, and it's a resounding success so far. And there's lots of interest in it going forward. And I think that's, it is key to getting it off the ground. And hopefully, as you mentioned before, that starts the ball rolling, and then you get some other private sector investment coming in with a bit more confidence around what else is happening in the area.
Yeah, and it's like with Festival Gardens as well, the collaboration with the council and the other government bodies to break that inertia and get things going. So it seems like the City Council has a real opportunity now to start on its new era, and what we're hearing is that partnerships with the private sector are the thing that is going to drive growth and attract occupiers, etc. Darren, I wonder if this relates also to this question: what can be done to increase the number of affordable homes in Liverpool, relating back to the housing crisis? Can the council help with that?
Just touched on it there, and Nicola mentioned it earlier this morning, that involvement with Homes England and the Combined Authority alongside the council can help unlock those challenging sites that can bring forward a mixed tenure of schemes, including affordable housing. One of the problems all over England, and certainly in Liverpool no exception, is the right to buy and the loss of that tenure of council housing. So even though if you have developers providing a percentage, say 30% for example, of affordable housing, the net amount of affordable housing on any year could still be negative because of those lost through the right to buy. Liverpool doesn't currently have a standard for a percentage of new housing to be delivered as affordable housing. That could change in the emerging local plan whenever that eventually gets adopted. But at the moment, I think the key is to having that collaboration between the Combined Authority, the Council and Homes England, in conjunction with the Council's new team established to deliver council housing for the first time, certainly in my generation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Another audience question here. Please do keep those questions coming in there. There's been some brilliant ones today, and it's nice to put our speakers on the spot. We spoke about infrastructure and transport a little bit in the first panel, the work's going on the Strand outside Lime Street Station as well, etc. Gary, I'll aim this one at you. What plans are there to improve cities' travel infrastructure, bringing back the tram network, electrifying bus fleets and EV charging points? With a massive development like Festival Gardens, you must be considering all of this and how it links up with the city centre.
It's, be really honest, Dan, it's not part of the work we're doing at the moment. It's just being involved in the remediation side of things at present, but obviously it will be a big part of what's in the thinking between the city council and the developer for the master plan. Mm-hmm. It will undoubtedly need better connections than it's currently got. It's really only serviced by road or bus at the moment, so it certainly needs a greater variety of public transport options or travel infrastructure options than it's currently got. The dog agrees. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
So yeah, that's we're not involved in that side of the development at the moment, to be honest, Dan. But undoubtedly, it needs a greater variety of options than it's currently got for it to be a proper connected site and a fully successful site, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much. There was an interesting point raised during the networking break there about the number of office workers in Liverpool and the fact that there's fewer compared to other cities. And might that benefit Liverpool in terms of its recovery from the pandemic, because the city is less reliant on custom from office workers compared to Manchester or London, for example?
That's a tricky one. I mean, it sort of contradicts everything that we've been saying so far, I suppose, in terms of, new schemes, encouraging business into the city. So you can only really look at it as something that needs to be built upon. If there's low numbers currently, we need to increase that footfall into the city centre by either encouraging businesses in, or you've got support for hospitality. I mentioned before the changes that we've seen, albeit almost enforced on the hospitality sector. Those that have had external spaces have changed into a fantastic provision now, the likes of Castle Street and Bold Street, and that's got to encourage people back into the city and encourage workers into the city. It's all that part of that cycle that everyone needs to support the hospitality sector, the retail sector, and we've got all these ingredients, and the office market needs that boost to get people back into the workspace, and then that will in turn support the service industries that rely on that footfall and the residents that live in the city centre as well.
Quentin, do you have a view on that? Do you think Liverpool could benefit in not having as many office workers?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a sign that it's an area we need to improve. I think it's by having those office workers, we get those well-paying jobs, which is that spreads out all over the city. It provides huge economic benefit. I mean, I think it's just it's an area that Liverpool is working on, and I think it's an area that is improving. We've just got to try hard to attract those kind of large employers. High quality jobs. University area is doing really well. I think the business district is starting to kind of turn around as well. Library buildings, India buildings, those ones, they've kind of really started to they will change the area of the city. Pall Mall side is critical. I think in terms of areas, we do see that hotels, the leisure economy is still going to be absolutely critical. To all of this, I think Liverpool, yes, it's got to move on with its office-based economy, and absolutely critical. But over the last 15 years, we've seen the number of hotels in Liverpool increase quite a lot. But we think that's only going to continue. We're currently working in municipal buildings, the former council offices for the fragrance group. So that's going to be developed for completion next year. And we're seeing a lot of interest from hotel developers. They've had a tough time over the last 12, 18 months. But there's a lot of interest out there. I think that area, that kind of leisure economy, is going to continue to grow in Liverpool, where it's not only in the waterfront and the kind of business district, we're also getting interest from operators looking up in the roadworks type area, the university area. So, in Paddington, they're obviously doing a hotel up there, so there's plenty of demand, for it. And we're getting signs that people are looking all over the city centre for, key hotel sites. So we see kind of the office space growing. And, maybe a slight fall away in student accommodation, which has been quite strong over the last 10 years. Still some interest there, and we've got some schemes completing, but we think the hotels are really going to be an area which is going to come back strong, as well as office space.
Okay. Darren, are you seeing that as well in terms of instructions that you're getting? Is hotels booming, and what other sectors should we look out for in terms of development in the city?
Yeah, definitely. We've had my Manchester colleagues had recent success for a hotel conversion on Church Street. we're working on the pre-app down on the Strand for the hotel that's going to be 4/5 star, which would be quite a good addition. I think that whilst there has been a definite difficult sort of 12, 14 months for the industry, it hasn't really dampened interest on our end, because we're right at the very beginning of those discussions, and everyone knows that, or well, everyone hopes that there will be an end to what's been going on for the past year, and that we can get back. So by the time something goes through planning and construction, etc., we should be well beyond the position we're in now.
There's a one from the audience which has received a few upvotes, so we better ask it. It says here, given emerging and new internet-based technologies and the move to the cloud, how important is fast connectivity to the property office estates in the region? Lynn, I guess this again goes back to appealing to occupiers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got past the point of how important it is. It should almost be a given that that's something that developers and landlords have to provide in the buildings now. There's lots of potential. There's lots of moves afoot actually to increase connectivity within the city region already. We're dealing with a couple of specific options that providers are coming into buildings that we're dealing with to make them hubs and to provide that fast connectivity throughout the city. Southport, actually, I know we're slightly outside the Liverpool label, but it's got loads of untapped potential for super fast connectivity, given the geography and the happy coincidence, I think, of two pipes that meet in that location that can make developments in that area off the scale in terms of connectivity and connections across the Atlantic and through the rest of the UK and Ireland as well. So yeah, it's absolutely critical. Hopefully it's on everyone's lists already if they're looking at developments or refurbishing commercial spaces, and it's an occupier's requirement, again, as a given. I think that that should be top of the list or up there.
We're seeing it in a number of the schemes we've been involved with or done recently, that things like the wired score connectivity rating are becoming an important selling point. And as Lynn says, they're pretty much a given now that that's got to be factored in if you want to be able to compete. So yes, fast connectivity, undoubtedly. We are also seeing it. We're doing quite a large build to rent scheme in Manchester at the moment, and it's high up on the investors, not the developer, actually, the investors' agenda on making sure that the connectivity of the apartments that we're building there is high up on their agenda too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we had our PRS event a couple of weeks ago, and that was something that came out as well. More and more, wired scored, well accreditation, they're going to become residents are going to become more aware of them, and they're going to be looking for them when looking for apartments, I think. Gary, we have a question from Max in the audience. I think we know the answer to this. It says, has the developer for the total 1,500 units been secured for Festival Gardens, or is this yet to be finalised? The last we wrote, Ion Developments and Midia were the two parties. Is that still the case?
That's still the case. Yeah, that's still the case, and they are the City Council's preferred developer partner for the entire site. So, yes.
Brilliant.
But as I said earlier, the master plan is still evolving, so it's still early days in that respect.
It's exciting to see what comes forward there, because it's a really key site, isn't it, Gary? It's where the city meets the waterfront. Previously maybe Liverpool hasn't done the greatest job on more recent developments how it addresses the waterfront. We want, it'd be nice to have an exciting scheme there that's still affordable, obviously, but it's you need something with a character and that reflects Liverpool and reflects the fantastic views and landscape you get down there. So really excited to see what comes forward on that one.
Yeah, absolutely, and hopefully it can tie in all the things that we've spoken about today. Council backing, which it already has to a degree, good design, and it can be maybe an exemplar for this new era for the City Council about how to do regeneration of these brownfield sites. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you so much to our panelists, to Gary, Lynn, Darren and Quentin for your time this morning. It's been a really great discussion. Also, a big thank you to everyone who has tuned in this morning and submitted questions, and to our sponsors, Pegasus and ITS. Remember, the next Place Northwest event will be in person, extremely exciting. We'll be heading to Chester Racecourse on the 24th of June for the Cheshire Development Update. And again, as I said earlier, for more information on that and for how to book tickets, please head to our website. For now, if you can stick around for a bit more networking, please do so. If you can't, we look forward to seeing you in Chester on the 24th of June. Thank you very much for your time.